They brought her wrapped in metallic gauze, soaked in the remnants of a noble war. Her veins had sealed themselves in a final act of refusal. Her alien body rejecting every transfusion, every plasma match, every whisper of artificial life. And still, she breathed raggedly, shallowly, clinging to the last sparks of defiance, as if survival itself had become an act of rebellion against fate. They called for more medics, more science, more ancient rites, until there was nothing left to call but desperation. And into that vacuum walked a human, a warrior no longer of rank, no longer of war, but still full of fire. His name was Corin, and when he looked upon the dying princess, he did not see a symbol or a royal or a failed prophecy. He saw a life not yet done. He volunteered blood, untested, unmatched, unthinkable. But the machines refused to scream. Their red lights blinked once, paused, then obeyed, and the room went silent as the transfusion began. At first, nothing changed, and then everything did. Her chest rose once shallow, again stronger. Then, with a certainty no one expected, her skin, which had dulled to ash, began to glow faintly. The golden hue of her people rekindled like dawn finding a buried ember. Her fingers twitched, her eyes flinched, her heart monitor, which had almost given up, began to pulse with rhythmic insistence. The healers gasped. The soldiers watching held their breath, and Corin simply stood there, transfixed not by her beauty, though she had it, not by the miracle, though it was one, but by the feeling that something ancient and irreversible had just begun. Because when she finally opened her eyes, they locked with his, and in that gaze was not confusion nor fear, but the raw fury of someone whose death had been stolen and whose body now spoke in the voice of two species at once. Word spread like fire through circuits and whispers. The heir of Virelia lived, and worse. She lived because of a human, the same race that had stood neutral. While the stars burned, the same bloodline that had refused their alliance now flowed within her. And not just passively. The royal seers could not interpret the aura that now surrounded her. It rippled violently, with unfamiliar harmonics. Her body fought itself, not in sickness, but in synthesis. And still, she grew stronger each day and stranger each hour. She remembered things she should not. Patterns from Corin's dreams, memories not hers, leaking into her speech, into her thoughts, into her war songs. She began to speak both her tongue and his, blending the two in a rhythm that made her court advisors shudder, and they began to whisper not of healing, but of contamination, not of prophecy fulfilled, but of rewritten destinies. Corin was summoned again, not to offer more blood, but to explain what he had done. Though he had no answers, he stood in the presence of the high conclave beneath banners woven with the symbols of ancient power, and said only what he knew, that he had seen someone worth saving, and given what he could. And if that act broke something sacred, then perhaps what was sacred needed breaking. The princess, now awake and walking, arrived uninvited to the chamber, cloaked in silence, but burning with presence. She placed her hand on Corin's shoulder, and her voice rang through the hall like a bell forged in defiance. She said, "He is mine, not as a possession, but as a mirror, as a flame that answered my flicker with his own. You call this unnatural? I call it rebirth." And they could not meet her gaze, for in her eyes now was a truth none could deny. It was revealed then, in scrolls locked beneath the ice vaults of their oldest citadel, that the line of Virelia was not meant to survive the next war. The prophecy was clear that the bloodline would end, to give birth to unity through its absence, not its continuation. Her survival was not destiny, it was deviation, and that terrified them more than any enemy. Corin learned it too, not from a scholar, but from her lips, as they stood atop the obsidian towers watching the twin moons spiral. She told him quietly that she had been bred to be the last, a vessel to end the cycle, not to rewrite it. And now, with his blood in her veins, she had become the fracture in the circle, the start of something no one could predict. She asked if he regretted it, and he said only this: if fate feared your survival, then fate chose the wrong species to challenge. The attempts came swift and cloaked in tradition. Poisoned blessings, rigged ceremonies, trials of loyalty spun as rites of passage. She passed them all with fire in her footsteps, and Corrin by her side, not as protector, but as proof. When they cast judgment, she raised her voice, and their walls cracked. When they voted exile, she summoned storms with her breath. When they sent assassins, she welcomed them with arms of golden flame. The blending of blood had not made her weak, but something else, something unseen before in their long memory. And though many fled her, many more flocked to her, called not by royalty, but by resonance, the rhythm of something new, born from defiance and unrecorded love. She stood at the gates of their oldest starcraft, her banner, no longer Varelian nor human, but etched in the symbol of two lives bound in rebellion, and said this: I was never meant to survive, but I did, and now the galaxy must learn to live with me. They set a course into the unknown, not to flee, but to seed a future not written by old gods or broken oracles. The starcraft pulsed beneath their feet, alive with languages still forming as her voice echoed through its corridors, guiding its mind, shaping its walls. Corrin moved beside her, a warrior no longer clad in armor, but in purpose. She walked with no crown, yet all who saw her bowed not to royalty, but to revolution. They landed on shattered moons where nothing grew and life bloomed. They passed through voids where old empires whispered curses, yet none could touch them. She began to sing, each note vibrating with both her soul and his memory, awakening forgotten systems, drawing out those who had hidden their hopes for generations. The stars began to shift their patterns, bending to new constellations that told stories not of war, but of defiance, not of bloodlines, but of choices. And though the galaxies watched in silence, they began to understand that something had changed forever, not by prophecy, not by throne, not even by survival, but by one act of shared humanity that refused to let one soul fade. And from that defiance rose, not a princess, not a warrior, but a legend written in flesh and flame. And the stars now remember her, not because she lived, but because she was never meant to, and did anyway, with him always by her side.